This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that gets in the way of it. You can subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening, rate it, review it. Let me know what you think. You can reach out at laura.bennett_ on Instagram. You can email undistracted at hope1032.com.au and find video versions of many of these conversations on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. Our guest today is Erwin McManus. He's an author, pastor, speaker, coach, and world-renowned communicator. He's been on the podcast a number of times and is back to talk about communication frequencies. Have you ever felt misunderstood? Like your words were being twisted, or that there are some people you just don't get, you don't resonate with them, and maybe they don't get you either. Erwin's book, The 7 Frequencies of Communication, looks at the core ways we interpret the world, how we listen to others and the benefit of that, and the way that our communication affects the condition of our lives. Let's welcome Erwin back to the show.
It's good to be back with you, Laura.
What was the need in that sphere of communication that you wanted to really contribute to when you wrote this book?
Well, ironically, it wasn't my idea. My wife has been begging me for probably 30 years to teach a course on communication. And probably the number one request I get from people all over the world is, how did you learn how to communicate the way you do? Could you teach us how to do that? And I don't know why, but I was always apprehensive to do that. And my son, Aaron, who works with me in business, he just kept coming to me and saying, people really need to learn how to communicate. And you need to create a process for people. And I have a process. I just never shared it with the world. It wasn't really, I think some of it is, I see communication as both an art and a science. And you don't want to do an autopsy on a living thing. And I feel like a lot of times people want to learn techniques and skills and methodologies. And I think communication is so much more about our essence, and that communication is an extension of our person. And so I didn't want to just turn it into a skill set. I really wanted to help people see that communication is the expansion of the self and connecting to other human beings. And so really it was just them constantly pressing me to meet this need. And because every time I traveled the world, this was the number one ask from people. So it wasn't really something I felt like I needed to bring to the world. It was something the world kept asking me to bring to it. And so that's really what motivated me.
It sounds then that communicators, a lot of us would think it's the person behind the microphone, it's the person on a platform. Do you see it that way, or is it a little bit different for you?
No, because I think every aspect of my life has been dramatically and radically impacted by my ability to elevate my own communication. I've been married for over 40 years, and there's no question in my mind that our marriage would not have made it if I had not learned how to communicate with Kim effectively. And we've raised 3 children, 2 of them that are biological, and both of our kids live within minutes of our home here in Los Angeles. They're full-grown adults, 36 and 33, and they chose to live within walking distance of us. And I don't think we would have that kind of relationship if we had not learned the power of communication in making human connections. So I don't see this as just a platform need. I think this is the human need, that humans long to connect. Our deepest desire and intention is to connect to each other. And without healthy communication, we simply do not make deep human connections.
So when we're talking about the frequencies of communication, what are you referring to there?
Well, a huge part of what I wanted to bring people is a way of hearing, because the best communicators are, in my mind, the best listeners. They have a unique ability to hear people well and to understand what people are actually meaning behind their words. And so it took me a little while, but I sat down and began processing through how people are heard. It wasn't really at first saying, how do people speak, but how do we hear each other? And I began putting together this paradigm that, by the way, is completely unique to us. You won't find this anywhere else in the world. And I began to identify 7 signature frequencies of human communication. And they're the commander, the challenger, the motivator, the healer, the professor, the seer, the maven. And I saw 5 of them right away. It was very easy because there's some very common communication frequencies that you do hear from all the time, especially if you watch social media, if you listen to, professional communicators, if you listen to people who are really influential in their ability to communicate and to pass on information. There are frequencies that are just common and reoccurring, but there are some other frequencies that are less common, but perhaps even more impacting. And so I put together the first 5, which were the commander, the motivator, the challenger, the healer, and the professor. It took me a little bit longer to really hear the 6th frequency of the seer, and which is really odd because that's my second highest frequency. And then it took me the longest amount of time to identify the 7th frequency, which is the maven, which is actually my primary frequency. And one of the things I realized in the process was that we don't really realize that we're emitting a frequency. We're just being us. I'm not trying to use a maven frequency. I'm just more inherently a maven, and that's the way I communicate, and that's the way people experience me. And my wife, her number 1 frequency is a commander. She doesn't wake up in the morning going, I'm going to command the universe. She doesn't wake up in the morning going, I'm glad I married this person so I have someone to command. She just inherently, naturally engages the world through this commander frequency. And one of the things, Laura, that I haven't really expanded on as much, and I think you're the first person I've shared this in a public space, is that the communication frequencies are more than a communication style. They are a neurological pattern. And that the reason you communicate the way you do is because your brain processes information a certain way and translates it to the world in a certain way. And so when a person is talking about, how do I change my communication style? I'm going, you can't change the way you communicate unless you change the way you think. You cannot expand the way you communicate unless you expand the way you think, because your communication system is connected to your cognitive system.
So is that something we should change then in terms of rewiring the way we think, or is it more about having an ability to help others understand the way we think a little bit better?
Well, one of the things that's so important about this is that the 7 frequencies of communication are not a static system. When you take a personality assessment or psychological assessment, normally they're very static. They tell you who you are. You're introverted or extroverted. You're intuitive or sensing. You make decisions based on logic, or you make decisions based on values, or you're highly structured, highly adaptive, and they teach us that this is who we are, and that's how we engage the world. But the 7 frequencies are a dynamic system. What they help you understand is what your core primary frequencies. This is your default frequency. This is how you communicate when you're not thinking, and all of us have a default mode. But what I really hope for people is that they expand their frequencies, because human beings are incredibly dynamic. And if we can learn how to expand our own communication frequencies, we're able to speak to different kinds of people in different environments incredibly effectively. But also, we learn how to hear people too and interpret them, because each frequency has interesting challenges for the hearer, because every frequency is incredibly powerful with one aspect of communication, but then is lacking in another. And so you might have a healer frequency that brings incredible empathy and therapy to their frequency, but they lack the clarity and the command of, I know you love me, but I don't know what you're asking me to do. And then you might have a person with a commander frequency that's just very utilitarian in their language, but it's lacking that empathy or that connectivity to your emotional well-being. And you're wondering, do you see me, or do you just see what I can do? And so each one of these frequencies has strengths and weaknesses, even when they're being operated from a very healthy core.
And I'm glad you say it's a dynamic thing, because personality tests and things of that nature, I'm always thinking, don't box me in, which is maybe because I'm more of the challenger, which is what I discovered through doing my own assessment. And so I just don't like it. But I do think there's something powerful about understanding how we communicate, the way that we see things. And from your perspective, is the benefit of understanding ourselves in that way, is it about being able to better communicate our own story, our own lives, the things that we really really see for the world? Or as you've sort of pointed out, is it more about hearing others better?
Well, I want to go back, Lauren, and say that every single person who has come to us and told us, I don't know if I agree with this assessment, was a challenger. And so it just confirms our data and our process. I think it's important to be able to communicate in such a way where you're understood, but I do not think that's the most important thing in life. I really think that if you want to make deep human connections, you have to create a higher value for understanding people. I don't know why, but there is almost a cultural thing of, I need to speak my piece. I need to speak my mind. I need to speak my truth. And is your goal to speak your piece, or is your goal to be understood? Those are two completely different outcomes. And then there's even a third kind of outcome. It's not to speak your mind and not simply to be understood, but to actually create positive change. And so once your outcome goal is, I want to bring positive change, now how people hear is more important than how you speak. And that's when the 7 frequencies become incredibly nuanced and dynamic.
How much of an influence does our childhood environment, the spaces we were raised in, have on the kind of frequency that we develop?
Well, I think it's both. It's both. There's clearly a genetic aspect to this, and clearly an environmental aspect to this. And some of it is just cursory observation. My daughter, Mariah, she has a daughter named Juno, and Juno is 3. And very, very quickly, Juno has some very dynamic communication frequencies. She's clearly a commander, but she's also clearly a motivator. Juno will go, you can do it. You can do it. I know you can do it. And she just naturally motivates people, but she also naturally commands. And those two frequencies might be a little bit environmental, but I think some of it is just, it seems to be out of the essence of who she is as a human being. But I also do think that if you grew up in an environment, let's say if you're a woman with a commander frequency, you might be raised all your life telling you that that's inappropriate, that you're being too pushy or too bossy or whatever it may be. And so you actually begin to diminish your primary frequency, which makes you feel awkward in your communication process because you're not actually using your primary strength in communication. And, if you grew up in a home that lacks a lot of empathy, but you have a natural healer frequency, people might begin telling you you're too weak, you're too soft, you're too sensitive. And so there can be environmental dynamics, but also you learn it in the environment. My wife Kim's a commander, and our son Aaron is a commander, but our daughter Mariah is a challenger. But my number 7 frequency, because we can actually see all 7, my number 7 is commander. And so if I looked at an environment, I'm going, my kids did not pick up my communication frequency. And because I do think a commander frequency has a more dominant environmental effect than a maven frequency. And so mine are maven and seer are the 2 top frequencies that I have. And Kim's are, I think, commander and then healer are her 2 top frequencies. And so you have a very different dynamic in that. So I do think environment affects you, but it doesn't create you. Even scientifically, we know that probably 70 to 80% of the information of who we become is encoded in our DNA, which is kind of extraordinary.
And you mentioned on that a moment ago how, particularly if you're watching social media, if you're looking at world leadership and the like, there are some styles that really rise above and seem more dominant and seem more present. If that's the way of it, that certain voices, certain styles are more prominent, their stories are being given more attention. Part of what you say in your book is that storytellers create the future. Is that what's at stake here then? Potential futures that are being shaped by the most dominant voices?
Well, I think the best voices texture their story with all the frequencies in it. And those are the strongest stories of them all. But the most important thing is to make sure we're using our authentic frequencies and not our shadow frequencies. And I think it's more significant than, are we creating the right story, or are we using the right frequencies, but are we actually using only shadow frequencies to tell the human story? And every frequency has a shadow. And the commander's the dictator, the challenger's the manipulator, the motivator's the performer, the healer's the cipher, the professor is the diminisher or the demeanor. The seer is the perfectionist, and the maven is the nihilist. And let me tell you, when we were first working through this design, and I asked, is there a TV show you want me to break down? And we lead an online global mastermind for business people, and they picked two shows, Friends, and then they picked Succession. So
Quite a contrast.
yeah, and so I went ahead and went with Succession. I felt it was more contemporary and more dramatic. And when I watched Succession, I did not find a single one of the seven frequencies, and it traumatized me, thinking, "Oh no, this paradigm doesn't work." And I stepped back, and I had this thought: look for the shadows. I went back and watched the first three episodes, and I realized there are seven main characters, and each one perfectly expresses each one of the seven frequencies, but only from the shadows. And so you imagine a family system of billionaires where all the communication is the dictator, the performer, the manipulator, the diminisher, the perfectionist, the nihilist, the cipher. And every communication between them is from a shadow, from a dark place.
And it's a really great example to bring up, because part of what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the dark sides that these communication frequencies can have. Because the aim of a lot of your work that you do is, of course, to bring people towards the healthy side of these sorts of things and every other aspect of life.
Yeah.
What are some of the things we can do to amplify the healthy side, the good side of our communication, if we feel like we are leaning in to that shadow side, as you say?
The one thing that's really important to understand is that you cannot change your frequency without changing yourself. That your frequency isn't like a pencil or a pen, and your frequency is an extension of yourself. And so the way we move into our shadows are through the unhealth of our soul, of our inner world. So when we're filled with bitterness or anger or jealousy or greed or fear, we move toward our shadows. And so you go, well, how do I get out of my shadow? You got to get out of the shadow in your inner world. You have to move from fear to courage. You have to move from bitterness to forgiveness. You have to let go of those negative emotions and begin to integrate positive emotions into your life. Pick a simple one. If you're a motivator and your shadow is a performer, if you want to be loved more than you want to serve, you perform. If you're afraid of rejection, rather than having a commitment to speaking the truth, you perform. If you don't know if you have value or worth, you perform. And so that performer isn't a skill set, it's an extension of your inner world. And so what you have to do is you have to deal with the inner world, and that naturally changes your frequency into the authentic positive frequency.
And the Bible tells us that in our words, in the tongue, is the power of life and death. So our words do matter, our communication matters. But why do you think that our words have that much power? How come they carry so much weight?
Well, for me, it's very clear in that it's part of our original intent that we are created in the image of God. And the imagery in the Bible is that God created through speaking. You know, God said, let there be light. And so his voice had the power to create. And I think this is a part of the reflection of the image of God in every human being. There's this interesting, like, sometimes you can have a belief system that's just one iteration off and it's not right, so you reject it completely. You know, there are a lot of people talk about manifesting. You know, you can speak reality into existence. Well, I actually don't think that's accurate, but I actually think it comes from something that is accurate. We can't speak the external world into reality, but when you speak into someone's inner world, it actually shapes their reality. When you speak into children, you tell them you don't matter, you're nothing, you're worthless, you're not, you're not loved. That actually creates a universe inside of them. When you speak into a child, you tell them you matter. I love how hard you work. I love your determination. You're loved unconditionally. You matter. You have significance. Your words are actually creating a universe inside of that human being. And I think one of the reasons this is so powerful is that our words, maybe I can't speak a word and create a planet, like that's not my creative power, but I can speak a word and bring hope and meaning into someone's life. I can speak a word and destroy the power of doubt and fear. and actually help create courage and faith. And so we need to realize that our words have infinite power, and that human beings are designed this way. And so our words are not just a utilitarian function of the human species, it is a reflection of the image of God inside of every human being.
I think to believe something like that, you've got to believe that humans are more than simply flesh, blood, bone, in your book, you explained that you once saw the world that way, and then you've moved more towards a perspective where you see humans as being a really dynamic combination of particles and waves and something that these frequencies can kind of move through. How did you get from that simpler view of life and humanity to the one that you have now?
Well, I think I was always a spiritual person. I always had a sense that there was more. I just didn't know what that more was, and I didn't know if the more could be known. But for me, one of the ways of studying the universe is to study particles. And when you look inside of your own soul and you realize that you long for more than just existence. And that was a huge part for me, going, what is it inside of me that keeps longing for something that may not exist? To be connected to the eternal, to not be trapped in this material body, to believe there's something beyond life itself. I know it's crazy, but this morning, even before I was taking a shower, I was thinking about how the universe is, if you're an atheist, the universal language is math. Like the universe speaks to itself in math. And I was just overwhelmed thinking, how is it possible that there's no other species that speaks the language of math except for humans? I mean, for me, it was like this explosion of another way of knowing we're created by God, that we are neurologically designed to speak the hidden language of the universe. I just don't think that's accidental. And so to me, all those things just kind of accumulated to an explosion of belief, of faith. But more than that, it was a longing to discover if my life actually had meaning.
I'm sure there's a few of us that'd be glad to hear the universe is about more than math, because otherwise we just wouldn't understand it. So I think that's your encouragement side coming out.
I just think that the language of God is interwoven in all of creation. And all you have to do is listen. And there's textures and layers of that. Yes, it's funny because even though I love math and I love that the language in the universe in a sense is math, but we do know we will never spend our lives searching for 2 + 2 = 4. But we will spend our lives searching for love. And that's, for me, just a reminder that the driving principle of all the universe is love. And that the outcome of that love is life. And, I don't think it's accidental. This morning, I was looking at a photograph that we were able to capture at the beginning of the birth of a star. And I was just marveling this morning going, it's insane that in this universe, there are still things that are being started. Because we always think we're at the end of the story. And sometimes we realize we're at the beginning of the story. And I just think interwoven in all the universe are just wonderful reminders of the unique significance of being human.
Yeah, and I think all of us have this inherent desire to be heard, to be understood, and something like knowing our frequencies, knowing other people's communication frequencies, that can be so liberating. But I'm sure there are people, and I know perhaps we will have experienced for ourselves times where you are being authentic, you are trying to communicate well, but you feel like your authentic self isn't heard or isn't understood. Even a moment ago when you mentioned if you're somebody that grew up in an environment where being a commander as a woman wasn't accepted, right? And that was kind of squashed. What do you do when your authenticity, which is so important, isn't welcome?
Well, I think sometimes we think that connection is about agreement. And we have to learn how to divide those two. We can connect on a human level and still not agree. But we've been taught that unless there's agreement, there's no connection. And especially if you're a challenger, a huge part of being a challenger is that you have a unique way of seeing the world and seeing people, and you want to bring the best out of them. And so you're seeing something in them that they may not see in themselves. And I think a huge part of not feeling like we're being seen authentically is oftentimes is actually not about us being seen. It's about others accepting the way we see them. So don't get confused between the two. And sometimes our frustration comes because we see the world a certain way and other people don't agree with us. But we're not actually letting them see us because we're afraid to actually be that vulnerable. So I would work it from this way. It's unlikely 8 billion people will ever see you authentically. All right. So find one or two. If you have one person who knows you for who you are, who sees you authentically, who actually hears not just your words, but your intention, I think that's an incredible gift in life. I think somehow we have this illusion that everyone should see us like that. And most people see the person they think we are, not the person we are. So you just want to have some people in your life that see you for who you are.
Is there a danger, though, that we just end up sticking with people that speak like us, think like us, that we resonate with really well, because that is more comfortable and we feel more seen?
Oh, I think that's what we humans do 99% of the time. And, it's why we have political parties. It's why we have sports teams. It's why, it's why it's the Wallabies, all the All Blacks. Everybody knows who to choose. Like, if you belong in the bar. It's why we have logos, and it's because human beings feel more comfortable feeling they're in the majority. So we surround ourselves with people who agree with us so that we feel validated. And I think one of the great human experiments is to open your life up to people who completely disagree with you and actually learn how to be friends with those people. I think that's one of the great challenges I would just give everyone. And one of the things I love about the 7 frequencies is, it's so obvious that humanity is in constant turmoil and conflict, that we find every reason to be against each other and very few reasons to be for each other. And one of the things about the transference of information is that when someone agrees with you, communication is easy because they're saying what you believe they should be saying. But when someone disagrees with you, communication becomes very complicated. Have you ever thought to yourself, they completely misheard me?
Yeah.
It's because they completely disagreed with you. So they reinterpreted your words to match what they felt you should have said. And it's the other way around. Sometimes you completely mishear people because you don't hear what they say. You hear what you think they should have said. And one of the reasons it's so difficult to actually have relationships with people who disagree with us is that we naturally reprocess their beliefs to match ours. And we just cannot believe it when they disagree. And instead of asking, well, the question we should ask is, help me understand the world from your perspective. That's when the world starts to open up for you. When you find someone who completely disagrees with you. And so I have friends who are far in the political right and far in the political left. And when I get with them, I'll ask them, I said, so how do you see what's happening in this election? Or how do you see this interaction between Trump and Zelensky? And I will ask people on both extremes, not to judge them, but to try to see the nuance of their perspective. I don't respect people because they agree with me. I respect people and I listen to their disagreement. There's a radical difference in that.
Absolutely. And I feel like in what you've done with the 7 frequencies of communication, it is going to help people from all sort of levels of life, whether it is in those political spheres, whether it's just us trying to work better with our friends, our family, whatever it might be. I want to know for you, though, as somebody who is such a great leader of communication, are there certain things, what are the things with your own communication that you feel like you need to develop or you would like to get better at?
Oh, well, if I plan to go from 40 years to 50 years of marriage, I got to get better at that, because you never hit a place in a marriage where, oh, now you're just on cruise control. You always have to keep listening and learning and adapting, and especially if you don't want to just exist in a marriage, but you want to actually thrive in one. And I think that's for me really significant. And also just understanding my own communication frequencies in terms of strengths and weaknesses. I've actually worked really hard and since I began this process on developing my commander frequency, because I always see commander as being too authoritarian. But now I've shifted my thinking and going, no, I need to use my commander frequency to bring clarity and confidence. And so what ends up happening is a lot of times those frequencies further from us, we only identify them and define them through their negative expression. And so I've been working really hard to go, okay, that's my 7th, and I need to see the value in it so that I can use it more effectively. By the way, the number one complaint I get from my team is we're not clear on what you really want. We don't know if you like something, love something, hate it, want it. We ask you a question, you ask us a question. We can't get an answer. And I go, the question is the answer. What is the problem? And so I'm working harder and harder to develop greater clarity in that. And so I think on a personal level, I'm trying to make sure that I can access the strengths of every frequency as I communicate with people. And that I can listen very carefully to the nuance of other people. And it's helped me tremendously to not misunderstand people. One of the phrases I think is so dangerous is when a person tells you what you said in an accusation. But one of the best questions you can ask people is this what you said? And it moves me and it moves us to greater understanding. So those are things I'm really working on because I want to be a great listener, and because I think being a great listener opens you up to great learning.
Erwin, thank you so much for what you bring to the podcast, to your books, to the platform all the time. And thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Undistracted. I hope you heard it as it was intended. And my goodness, fascinating. The 7 frequencies of communication. You can check out that book from Erwin McManus wherever you get yours. Would love to hear what you thought of the episode too. You can reach out to me on Instagram at laura.bennett_, email undistracted@hope1032.com.au. And until next time, enjoy living this undistracted life.